Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia daf Kuf Aleph. It's the daf for Shabbat. We're going to get started from the Mishnah at the very last line of the Mishnah, and then we'll jump to the beginning of today's daf. So the last line of the Mishnah had read, Shataf Nahar Zetav, a river comes and washes away my olive tree, brings it into your territory, and it gets planted there in your garden. The Mishnah had ruled, Ze omer Zetai Gidlu, Ze omer Artzi Gidla. Each of us claim it's right, the olives that grow on that tree, it's on account of my tree. And you said it's on account of my soil that gave it nutrition. Well, the halacha is yachloku. We split 50-50. To which the Gemara is now going to bring two different versions of Rish Lakish's understanding of what is the case in the Mishnah. And if you remember, Rish Lakish lived in Israel, and there were people who brought the Torah of Israel to Babylonia. So one of them is Ula. And Ula here is quoted as quoting Rish Lakish. And then what we're going to have is a problem with this, and then we're going to bring a different version of what Rish Lakish said, quoted in the name of Ravin, or Ravin. So Amar Ula, Amar Rish Lakish, Lo Shanu Ela. Lo Shanu Ela means this Mishnah is not taught other than in this case, meaning we're going to qualify the case of the Mishnah. Ela shene'eklu b'gushehen. But the first thing, before we even get to this, is you have to understand there's laws of orla when it comes to fruit trees. What does that mean? It means that for the first 3 years of having produce come off your trees, you're not allowed to eat the produce. And why is that relevant here? Well, we have a tree that got moved to a new place. Now, when the tree gets moved to a new place, there's different laws, and it depends on the situation about whether you have to start counting orla from the beginning. So Rish Lakish is going to say, according to Ula, that this is not a case when it actually would be obligated in orla. Okay, we're neutralizing that issue, although not fully, which we'll see. It was uprooted with some soil, not just the tree with the roots, but also there was soil attached. And Rashi quotes a Mishnah in Orla that says that Ilan shene'ekal, in the third line of Rashi, v'asela imo, and it has the rocks with it, really means the soil with it. Im yachol lichyot patur v'im lav chayav. In other words, it needs to be able to live on its own. So if it comes with soil of its own, meaning it could have lived on its own, it's not obligated in orla for the new person. So now that's number one. And we'll see in a minute why this is relevant. Ula achal shalosh. And after 3 years, meaning this rule that we have to split it 50-50 is only after 3 years passes. Why? What happens the first 3 years? Aval betoch shalosh, hakol shabal azetim. It was my tree. I get all the fruits the first 3 years. Why is that? Damar le. I can say to you, and now there's a whole dimension that we're going to talk about this case. I'at natat betoch shalosh mihava achelt. What's the problem here? The problem really lies in that now my tree is in your garden. You can't plant another tree. So if you're going to have to share these fruits with me, you're going to complain and say, well, I could have planted my own tree and gotten all the fruits myself. So I say to you, listen, the first 3 years, that's not true. If you had planted a new tree, you'd have to wait the 3 years for the orla. And therefore, you can't claim ownership over the first 3 years. And therefore, the first 3 years, I get completely myself. After that, we split 50-50 because you claim, oh, you're preventing me from putting another tree there. So you should get. And I say, well, it's my fruit that brought all the fruits, so I should get. So we split it 50-50. So that's what they say about betoch shalosh. First 3 years, a kol shabal azeti. Okay, that we said. So now the Gemara has a problem with Ula and says, I don't get it. Leimale, why don't you counterclaim my claim about, I said, well, you couldn't have planted there anyway. But you could say, Iana nate, if I had been able to plant my own tree, well, it's true I couldn't eat the first 3 years. But lachar shalosh havachin ale kule, I would have eaten everything after 3 years. The whole thing would have been mine. Hashta deka'al achal palga bahadai. Hashta ka'achal palga bahadai. So now that you get to get some of my fruits, you say to me, in other words, after 3 years, we're going to split it 50-50. But that's not fair to me, you say, because you want to get all the fruits after the 3 years. You say, if your tree hadn't been here, I would have planted my own tree and had all my own fruits. So your claim is, even though theoretically the first 3 years you wouldn't have had fruits, but since you're going to have to share them with me for the next rest of your life, you should be able to get you should get the 50-50 beforehand as well. And therefore, this was a problematic statement of Rish Lakish. Ella, Ki'ata Ravin Amar Rish Lakish. So Ravin came and said the name of Rish Lakish. Lo shanu ela shene'eklu begushen ubetoch shalosh. So now we're keeping it with the gush. It comes with its own soil, but betoch, but the splitting 50-50 is going to be within the first 3 years. In the first 3 years, we split 50-50. Why is that? For the reason we just said. Okay, and we're going to get back to this exactly. We're going to see inside why. But the first 3 years, we split it 50-50. But after the first 3, hakol ba'ala karka. You actually get entirely all the fruits because, again, if you had been able to plant your own tree, you would have gotten all the fruits. So theoretically, what's supposed to happen according to this is you still have to compensate me, like as if you went to a nursery and bought a sapling, like my tree was. If you have to reimburse me for that, but all the fruits you get after that are your own. To which they say, wait a minute, but why can't I counterclaim and say, but still, it doesn't make sense. Why should you get the first 3 years? Maybe we understand that you get all the fruits after the first 3 years, but I should get all the fruits for the first 3 years. To which we, right now that you're going to eat everything, palga bahadai, at least, in other words, right? So at least since that I should be able to claim the following. You want to split it for the first 3 years and not after, but that's not fair because if, 1 second, sorry, I lost my if you had planted, betoch shalosh, you wouldn't have been able to eat. So hashaka achil palga bahadad. Right. So I guess the point is, since you're getting for the first 3 years, we should at least be, in other words, again, this is the flip of the previous. Since right now we're going to split for the first 3 years and then you're going to get everything. But I say, since you couldn't have eaten the first 3 years and yet you're getting the fruits, so you should compensate me by splitting for all the next years. But that's not a good claim because mishum de'arale ananate have a katina vizar ana totayu silka v'yarka. I can't claim that you couldn't have done anything those first 3 years. And that's why I'm not going to get anything down the road and I'm only going to get for the first 3 years. Because my claim of, well, you wouldn't have been able to eat any fruits isn't really true. Because if it wasn't an olive tree, which has a lot of leaves on it and a lot of shade, you could have said, you know what, I was going to plant a very thin tree with thin leaves with not a lot of foliage, in which case I would have been able to plant Swiss chard and I would have been able to plant vegetables and things would have grown on the ground there. But because your olive tree with all these leaves came in my way, it prevented me. And that's why you end up winning basically in this case, that after the 3 years, you're going to get everything. And during those 3 years, we're going to split it 50-50. So that was a way to explain this law in the Mishnah. Under what circumstances are we talking about? So the conclusion seems to be Ravin's version of Rish Lakish. The first 3 years we split it. After that, you get everything. And again, you have to compensate me for my sapling, for my tree, but that's it. I don't get any fruits at all. Tana, here's a bright. Amar hala, zeitai ani notel, ein shomim. So if I say, I'm going to uproot that tree, this is my tree that went into your property. I'm just going to take it out of your property and bring it back to my garden. Ain't show me no, I can't do this. My time, well, what's the reason? Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum yishuv Eretz Israel. Now, this is an important halacha. Because we want to keep the land of Israel, we want to plant things in the land of Israel, we're not allowed to uproot things. So if this tree, even though it was in my property, which is really interesting to think about, it was planted in my property, flies into your property, I now can't get it back because of this law of Yishuv Eretz Israel. That's what Rabbi Yochanan says. And if you're surprised by this, so is Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, I'm a Rabbi Yirmiyah. By the way, remember, Rabbi Yochanan's living in Eretz Israel, as was Rish Lakish, who was discussing this halacha. I'm a Rabbi Yirmiyah kigon dat tzricha rabba. Something big like this needs someone prominent like Rabbi Yochanan to say so. And if he hadn't said it, kind of thing like, I don't know that I would have believed it or accepted this, but he said it, so that's what it is. And on account of that statement of Rabbi Yirmiyah, in reaction to something Rabbi Yochanan said, we're going to have another situation. We're going to start with a Mishnah from Demai, learn another halacha where Rabbi Yirmiyah has the same reaction. Tananatam, it says there in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Hamekabel Sedeh Avotav Min Anochri. We're going to have to figure out what Sedeh Avotav means. We're going to see some different interpretations of it, two different options. Just like before, we have Rish Lakish version 1 and then Rish Lakish version 2. Also here, we're going to have two different versions. So Rabbi Yehuda says, someone who is mikabel. Mikabel doesn't mean accepts. It means an aris, okay, which is like a kablan, contracted worker. Here we're talking about a sharecropper. I work in your field. For percentages, I get 30% of the land, I work it, and then I give you 70%. 70% remains yours, 30% I take. In this case, though, he was mekabel shtei avotav, which at first glance we're to think means property that was in Israel, meaning our forefathers. Min anochri, meaning I'm a sharecropper for a Gentile. That's why we assume it wasn't his own land, because it's a Gentile's land. So it wasn't his father's land if it's a Gentile's land. This is an interesting halacha. The aris is supposed to first take maaser on all the crops that he collected in the field. And then, so out of 100, he's going to take the truma, the 1/50th, and then the maaser and all that, right? So we'll take a decent percentage of what's there, take it all off the top. So it's like income tax. Do you take it off the top or do you deduct things first? Takes it off the top. Then 70% of what's left goes to the Gentile, 30% goes to the aris. Okay, that's a huge difference. And if you just took the Trumot and Masrot on the 30%, be a big difference. So he has to take the larger amount. Savruha, now they thought my stavotav, Eretz Israel. So they thought, like I told you, which is the stavotav means land in Israel, in which case you'd have to hold. Now, why are you taking Trumot and Masrot and land belongs to a Gentile? Because first of all, why they call it stavotav? It wasn't his father's field. Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, because it was a field that belonged to, as I said, their ancestors, all the way back to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, meaning the land in Israel was all, presumably, right now we're assuming, was all owned by them. V'kasaval, and they hold that in kinyan l'nochri be'eretz Yisrael lafkia miyah maaser. By the way, it doesn't really matter if we hold all of that, right? And it was all promised to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, whether they technically owned it or not, it doesn't matter. The point is, this is considered the land of Israel. This is obligated by Trumot and Masrot, right? Nobody thinks he has a kinyan on it that he can claim it's mine, but he has to take the Trumot and Masrot on it. He has to tithe the produce. Now, if you hold, you have to hold kasavar. If otherwise, this wouldn't make sense. Ein kinyan l'nochri be'eretz Yisrael lafkia miyah maaser. When a Gentile buys land in Israel, it doesn't uproot the obligation for maaser, meaning the land of Israel is what causes the chiyuv of maaser. It doesn't matter who owns it. And you would have to assume another thing, because in aris, if he really only makes 30%, then the 70% belongs to the Gentile, in which case he shouldn't be taking maaser off the top. He should give the Gentile the 70% and take the maaser off of the 30%. But what this opinion seems to be holding is mikabel, right? This is Rabbi Yehuda. Mikabel kichocher dami. A mikabel, who's an aris, a sharecropper, is like a chocher, which is a different type of sharecropper. The way it works with a chocher is that I say I'm going to work in your land. It's your land entirely. I say I'm going to work there. But I don't tell you I'm going to give you a percent. I'm going to take a percentage, keep a percentage, and the rest goes to you of everything in the land that grows that season. I say I'm going to pay you X amount of produce, whether or not it grows or not. Whether, let's say it's a huge, amazing year, I might make a lot more money off of it. Right? It's actually a good method to use. I mean, so is sharecropping, because you get percentages. There's incentive to work the land well. But this is even more, because I have a lot of incentive to actually produce a ton, because I anyway only have to pay you a certain amount. So, but it's a loss for me if I don't actually plan anything, which really means, in a sense, that when I'm a chocher, the whole thing is really owned by me, even though I'm not the owner. But I have rights to everything, and from that, I'm going to pay you what I promised I would pay you, like 50 se'ah of wheat, let's say. So it could produce 150, and I'll get 100 and you'll get 50. But the point is, the 50 I pay you is an obligation. It's not that it's owned by you, in which case I would have to take maaser and everything. And what this is saying, that we're going to treat an aris, a regular sharecropper who makes percentages, like a chocher. And here, let's read it inside. Ma chocher, what's true about a chocher? Bein aved, bein lo aved, ba yisurei umetanle. Whether I work the land or didn't work the land, I still have to first take Masrot on everything because it belongs to me, so to speak. I'm the owner of all of this, and then I have to just pay you what I promised I would pay you. And I would do it, by the way, there's a way to read this like this. Whether I worked it or whether I didn't work it, anyway, I have to pay, and therefore, buy a Surya Metame. That's why I have to take the Maaser from the top and then pay you from what's ever left. Because it's really like I'm just giving you something I'm obligated to pay you. So therefore, we're going to treat an aris, a sharecropper who makes percentages, in the same way. He's going to have the same law as the chocher. So he's like someone who's paying an obligation, and therefore maaser v'noten lo. However, this is not going to work, this explanation, because Amalei Rav Kana le Rav Papi, the Amalei le Rav Zvid, so Rav Kana says it to one of them, and Lahada Tanya, but there's a different brayta that doesn't fit with this, because it says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, the same Rabbi Yehuda, HaMekabel Sidei Avotav mi matzik nochri. If you get land, which let's say we assume it means in Israel, from one of these Gentiles who seizes property, Maser v'noten lo, you have to take Maser off the top, and then right, you're working as a sharecropper for this Gentile who seized the property, you have to take the Maser from everything. But my matzik, why would it have to be a Nochri who seized property? Afilu ein matzik nami. We just learned it would be from any Gentile who owns the property, you have to take the Maser off the top. And therefore, can't be explained that way because it doesn't make any sense, that source. We're now going to reject everything we said before. Really, a Nochri, a Gentile who actually buys land fair and square, there's no obligation to tithe the property. And and which seemed ridiculous to even say an aris was like a chocher. An aris is not like a chocher because an aris just makes percentages. And theoretically, you would only have to take maaser on your own portion. Right? You would leave the 70% for the owner and do it on your 30%. Umay steavotav. So then what is steavotav here and what are we talking about? Steavotav means steavotav mamash. It means it really was your father's field. Now, what are you doing being an aris in your father's field? And what is it doing in the hands of the Nochri? If not, the Gentile stole it, seized it. So we're talking about land that technically belongs to you, but it's in the Gentile's hands right now. And you're working as a sharecropper. In that case specifically, where you're working as a sharecropper on your own land, then you have to take the maaser. Now, you only have to take maaser in that case because it's not really owned by the Gentile. They just stole it. And my steavotav mamash, right? So the field is really your father's field. Uledide hu de kansua Rabbanan. And it's only if you're working on your own property, not if, let's say, a Gentile sees property and I decided to work on that property, but it wasn't my father's, it was my neighbor's, okay? Then I wouldn't have to take the maaser off the top. Only in this case, it's a penalty to me. Now, it seems unfair. Why should I have a penalty? So we'll see. Now, why are we giving this penalty to me and not to, let's say, if it was my neighbor's property, I wouldn't have to do this? Then again, I would just take the maaser on the 30%. We assume that I'm willing to work as a sharecropper with these conditions that I'm making 30%, and I'm willing, and I'll take the maaser off the top. Why is that? Because I care about this land. It's the land that was always in my family's property. I have a lot of connection to it. So I'm willing to do this deal. But not if it's not my own field. And that's why it's specifically steavotav. Now, we still haven't explained why I'm being penalized for this. So why would you penalize me for this? I didn't do anything wrong, right? Why did the rabbis institute this penalty? We don't like that Gentiles seize property that belongs to people. What do we want? We want this to be returned to Jewish hands. So what do we say? We disincentivize you to become a sharecropper in your family's land without figuring out a way to take this to court or buy it back, do whatever you have to do to get it to be considered your property. That's what the rabbis want. They don't want land in the hands of Gentiles, especially when they seized it. They want it to be brought back to Jewish hands. And therefore, they basically say to you, you care about this field? Great. We're going to penalize you to incentivize you to figure out a way to get the land back to yourself. because it's not financially feasible. It's better for you to spend money, because in the end, you'll spend less money on your tithes. So basically, they want to get you to get your land back. To which Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Kigon dat tzricha rabba. Wow, that's an interesting statement. I don't know that I would have come up with that on my own, kind of thing. And had it not been from some prominent person saying it, I might not have believed it. Itmar. Now we're going to talk about another similar case to the case about the olives. Now the olives, there was a river that came, a stream swept away my tree. What if Itmar hayored letoch sde chavero nita'a shelo bereshut? I go into your field and I plant there without permission. I just decide to plant some crops. Amarav, shamim lo v'yado ala tachtona. Rav says we evaluate how much I spend and how much I increase the value of your property. Now, I didn't ask you permission. Rav says it doesn't matter. I still get paid, but since I didn't ask your permission, I get paid for my work the least possible, either my expenses or the amount I increased your land. If I spent more money and only increased the land X, then I pay X. If I spent less money, I spent a certain amount of money, Y, and I increased your value to Y plus 10, I only get Y. I always get the lower value. Shmuel amar, omdim kama adam rotze litem b'sadeh zeh l'nata'ah. What do you mean? Okay, I did it without your permission, but I should get paid whatever anyone else would have gotten paid to plant your field. Amar Papa velo pligi. In fact, they don't disagree. They're each talking about different cases. Kam b'sadeh ha'asuya lita, kam b'sadeh she'en ha'asuya lita. If you had a field that you weren't planning to plant in anyway, well, if you weren't planning to plant in it, and I increased the value and put this money into it, then since it wasn't anyway meant to, well, that's going to be Rav's opinion. That where Rav said, whatever, you have to pay me the least amount. But if it was a field you anyway were going to hire someone, and I did it for you, even though I didn't ask your permission, I get paid like Shmuel says, the regular amount. And Rav and Shmuel are going to agree about that. And now they're going to tell us that the fact that Rav says this, he never said it explicitly. It wasn't like he taught in the Beit Midrash, this is what the halal is, but we can infer it from a certain case that happened. And this is really going to show that Rav holds by the distinction that we just said. Itmar, because remember, they don't disagree, they're just each talking about a different scenario. Somebody goes in front of Rav and says, someone planted in my field, what do I do? So Amar zil shumle, go evaluate how much he put, right? We're not exactly sure what he says at this point, go evaluate, but probably evaluate what the expenses were, what the increase was, and whichever one, the lower value. Amar lo beina, he says, look, I don't even want this field. I didn't want the crops to be growing here. Amar zil shumle v'yado ala tachtona. Listen, he still increased the value of a field, so again, give him the lower amount. That's what Rav said before. Shamin lo v'yado ala tachtona. And this is a field that is not meant to be planted, right? Clearly, the guy doesn't want it. It must be a field not meant to be planted. However, so that already proves Rav that we saw before, and that what Rav said fits in with a field that wasn't meant to be planted. But Amar lo beina, he says, I really don't want it. So now Rav really didn't know what to do. He was a little bit stuck. But even though the guy said, I don't really want this, the next thing Rav saw was that the guy put up a fence and was protecting the field. So obviously, he did want it. To which Amar Rav says, Gilita adatech, you clearly showed that you're happy to have this field. In which case, Zil Shum Levi Yado al Elionah, then you have to pay him, and he has the upper hand, meaning you have to pay him whatever the going rate is, and that's what Shmuel said, which we now see Rav said in a different scenario. So he thought the scenario was that the guy wasn't interested, but it turns out the guy really was interested. Maybe he switched his mind about it, but either which way, once he was interested, then he had to pay. Itmar, now we're going to have a similar case, but with a house. You have a plot that you're not using. I go in, I build a house there. And you basically can kick me out and say, this is my property. I get the house. The question is, what do you have to compensate me for? And the real question is, what if I want to take my house away? So Amarlo, Eitzai Vavanai Ninotel. And I said, I want my wood, I want my stones back. I'm taking apart the house. Rav Nachman amar shomim lo. Rav Sheshet amar ein shomim lo. Rav Sheshet says, if I build land in your property, I cannot take it apart. It's yours now. Now, again, you'll have to compensate me for my raw materials, for my work, but I have no rights to take it down. It's not really mine anymore. And Rav Nachman thinks I can insist on taking it down, and you have to listen to me. Meitive. Now we're going to question Rav Nachman. Rashbag omer, Beit Shammai omrim shomim lo, Beit Hillel omrim ein shomim lo. According to Rashbag, this is machlokah Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel. Lema Rav Nachman damar Beit Shammai. How could it be that Rav Nachman holds like Beit Shammai? No, we never hold like Beit Shammai. To which the answer, Huda Amar Ki Aitana. There's actually a debate about whether Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel debated this point, and Rav Nachman told by the other opinion that thinks they didn't debate this point. Teitanya Shomim lo divrei Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar just says simply, we listen, and that's the opinion Rav Nachman was holding back. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel omer Beit Shammai omrim shomim lo, Beit Hillel omrim ein shomim lo. According to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, it's machlokah Beit Shammai Beit Hillel, but not everybody agrees with that. And that explained Rav Nachman. But my havela, what's the law? Can you take apart your house or not? I'm a Rabbi Yaakov, I'm a Rabbi Yochanan, turning out I'm a bet. We distinguish between a house and a field, and this is going to bring us back to full circle to where we started. If I planted your field, we can't allow me to uproot it because I already planted things in Israel. I can't just uproot them. But if it's a house, I can take apart a house. But some people say, no, the difference between a house and a field has nothing to do with Yeshuv Eretz Israel. It has to do with that once you planted things in my soil, or I planted things in your soil, I ruined the soil already. I weakened it. And then your soil won't be the same. I caused you a loss. And that's why you can insist that I don't take it out. But that's not true for a house. My benai, what's the difference between the two options here? It's obviously, if it's abroad, then you still have the problem of it weakening the land, but you won't have the problem of Yeshuv Eretz Israel, which is obviously only the case for Israel. New Mishnah. Hamaskir, maybe we'll stop here for a minute before we go on and we'll review. So we had the olives going, right? The olive tree flying into your property. We saw two different explanations of Rish Lakish as to when we actually say which of the years that we say we have to split a 50-50. Then we moved to this other. Then we had Rabbi Yochanan, who basically explained that it was because of Yeshuv Eretz Israel, that we don't allow you to take it out. And from there, we got to this other case now about the house. Can you uproot a house? Difference between a house and a field. Then we went to, in the middle of that, because of this comment Rabbi Yirmiyah had to Rabbi Yochanan's halacha, we went to this other thing about taking a field, being a sharecropper on a field of a Gentiles. And again, we had two different interpretations of what that case was. Okay, now we're moving to Maskir Bayit L'Chavero. And now we're going to get into all sorts of interesting laws of house rentals. So I rent you a house. Now, some of this is similar and some of this is different from the way we have laws about this nowadays, or the way we do things. In those days, they would rent for 30 days, or they would rent without, if they specified, then it's a different story. But we're talking about where we didn't specify how long a period it would be. We just came up with the price and I started renting your house. So the question is, at the end of the 30 days, can you kick me out? Can you raise the price? All sorts of things. So is there an assumption that this is ongoing, even though we didn't say anything? And as we say, stam schirut, like if you didn't specify, we assume it's 30 days. So the question is that contract still valid after the 30 days or not? At what point can you kick me out? So the Mishnah says, so that's similar. Okay, I'm sorry, that's different because nowadays, usually you rent for a year or for, 2 years or up to 3 years or with options and all that. They didn't do that, or at least if they did, that's not the case we're talking about here. And then, obviously people did do it, and we're going to see cases like that as well. The other issue is, which is similar, which is in the summer months, it's very easy to rent. That's when all the rentals come up. In the winter months, people don't generally rent. So it's harder to find a rental in the winter months. So therefore, if you rent a house to someone in the winter months, from Sukkot till Pesach, the whole rainy season, you can't kick them out because they'll have nowhere to go. But in the summer, you can kick them out. Now, we'll see that this 30 days means you have to give them 30 days warning. Okay? You can't kick them out after 30 days, although it sounds like the simple reading of the Mishnah is you can kick them out after they've been living there for 30 days without any warning. But we'll see in the Gemara, they're going to say what this 30 days means is that you have to warn them 30 days before. Ubikrachim, if it's a big city, echad yemot hachama v'echad yemot hagshamim, doesn't matter summer, winter, 12 chodesh. Okay, you need 12 months warning. Again, I'm already explaining it the way the Gemara is going to do, which is you need to warn them 12 months in advance because it's very hard to find a rental in a busy city. Everything is kind of taken. Ubechanuyot, echad arayot v'echad krachim, if it's a store, it doesn't matter whether it's in a big city or a small city, because it's a totally different issue here. 12 chodesh. You need 12 months warning. And Rashbam gomer chanut shel nachtomim v'shel tzavaim shalosh shanim. If it's a bakery or the dyers, then it's 3 years. And why is that? Because whether it's a year or whether it's 3 years, it's because these are people who generally in their stores, they give people items and only get the money later. And because of that, right, they sell on credit. They need time to collect all their debts, or all the right, all the money that people owe them. If you kick them out right away, no one will be able to find them or pay them, and they'll be stuck. So you have to warn them, and the bakers and the dyers. It was much longer process for them of how long they gave people to pay back the money, and that's why they get 3 years warning. So now the Gemara asks, I already told you some of this, but the Gemara is going to ask, why do we assume you can't get kicked out in the winter months? We assume you rent by season. So you rent it for the winter, you rent it for the whole winter, right? This happens, people go to Florida for the winter, right? It's the whole winter season. And Yemot HaChamanami, though, but also in the summer then, if you have a summer house and a winter house, so in the summer months, you would also, so why should it be any different? To which they answer, because it's much harder to find a rental, this I told you already. But then, okay, if it's all about finding a rental, now here they're going to say, if we understand it literally, that you get 12 months from the time you moved in, and not that we warn you 12 months before, but we assume it means when you rent in the winter months, you get to the end of the season, even if you didn't specify. When you rent in the summer, you get till 30 days. At the end of every 30-day period, they could kick you out. And then if you're in the big city, at the end of 12 months, we kick you out. But if we just said that it's hard to find a rental in the middle of the winter, what if you happen to have started a rental in the middle of the winter and then it finishes in the winter? What? He could kick you out? Amai. You're still going to have the same problem. You won't find a place to rent. So Amar Rav Yehuda lahodia katani. And this is where we get to the explanation I said before, which is all these numbers are to let you know how many days in advance. And this sounds like a rental contract. You sign a rental on a house and they tell you, right? There's a clause that says, and we're going to see this also inside, for both sides. If you want to move out of the rental, if they want to kick you out of the landlord wants to kick you out, they have to give you a warning of X amount of time. And that's what this Mishnah is all about. And this is how to read the Mishnah. If you rented your house without specifying a time frame, now, it didn't say 30 days about the Yemot HaGshamim, but what they're saying is, you have to warn someone 30 days before the winter season starts, because once it starts, you can't kick them out at all. Tanya Namihachi, and here's a braita to support Rav Yehuda's reading. Both the 12 months and the 30 days, what they meant is, you have to announce. And here we get the other direction. Not only are we talking about the landlord, also the tenant needs to announce that they're leaving their house. Because you as the landlord could say, hey, had you told me, I would have found someone else to take your place. Now I'm stuck and I don't get rent payments. So it goes both ways. Amar Rav Asi, and it's a little hard to understand what Rav Asi's unique halacha is. There's a bit of a debate about how to understand Rav Asi. If you lived one day during the winter season in the house, you can't kick him out any of that time. But doesn't it say 30 days? And that's why most people say this is really just explaining Rav Yehuda again. This is what it means. There's the 30 days, if you live there for one day, you had to be warned 30 days before in order to allow the landlord to kick you out. They can't kick you out if you weren't warned those 30 days before. Now, even though you have to stay in, okay, I rented your house, I have to stay there you can't kick me out, sorry. You can't decide to kick me out for 30 days, for the whole, saying this all wrong. If I rent your house in the winter, you can't kick me out for the entire winter season. But if you want to charge me more rent, you can. To which, Amalei Rav Nachman, hi, linkete bekovse delish begele klima. Okay, now there's a bit of a graphic description of this. I'm going to go with the Aruch that has a bit of a cleaner explanation, which is this is basically grabbing someone by their shirt to basically make sure the shirt stays with them. Okay, this is like pulling on you in a way that you're stuck. If I'm there and I don't have a place to rent and you raise the price on me, right, that's very unfair. You're taking advantage of me. You're basically saying, we know you have nowhere to go, so we'll just raise the price and make it unpleasant for you. That's very unfair. So how can we let you do that? Lo tzricha yakir bate. It must be a case where the price of houses went up in the middle. Now, again, remember, this isn't like nowadays. If we signed a contract for a year, you can't just raise the prices just because the prices went up. It happened to me once. I moved into an apartment. By the time I left there, I locked into 3 years rent price. And by the time I left there, the prices of the same type house had gone up by 50%, but I was locked into that price. But here we're talking about where you only took a contract or had an agreement without any specification of dates. And that meant 30 days. And that's it. After 30 days, they could change the price on you if the prices went up. Pshita, here now we have another thing. This also happened to me, but not exactly, but there's a bunch of things that are similar. Nafele beta. Okay, one time I was living, okay, let's say the case and I'll give the case. Nafele beta means, what if the landlord's house falls down? So the landlord rents out this house, has their own house, but the landlord's house falls down. If that's the case, the landlord could come to me and say, listen, I'm no better than you. I'm going to kick you out. It's true you have nowhere to live, but I have nowhere to live. So the landlord has the right to kick me out. It happened once. I was living in an apartment, and out of the blue, the landlord said, my son got married. I'm giving him the house. According to the Gemara, you can't do that. Okay, but I probably had a clause in my contract that said they could kick us out if they warn us in advance. They must have given us the time, I hope. I don't remember all the details. I was pretty young at the time. It was pretty shocking. We had been living there and all of a sudden we had to leave. So we'll see, according to the Gemara, that's not the same thing. If the guy's own apartment fell apart, then it would make sense. Zabne or orte or yave b'matana. But if he sold it to someone and the new landlord wants to kick me out, or he died and gave it to his children, or yave b'matana, or gave it as a gift to someone, Amar Leah, I could say to them, you're just taking the place of the person I had an arrangement with. If they can't kick me out the whole winter season, then neither can you. Kalale Libre, this is really like the case I had. If you want to make it a wedding home for your son, okay, this could be the place where the wedding takes place, and also the son's then going to live there. Chazina, you have to check. Still have enough time to warn them before the winter season starts, then you can do that, or 30 days in the summer. This is the case I have with my landlord. I could say, just because you want to put your son in there, that's no different than me. And that's like a new thing that came up. It's not like you were living in a house and rented me yours. This is something else. Well, that's not my problem. And you made a commitment. You have to keep to the laws of the Mishnah. But again, my landlord probably had a clause in the contract that allowed him to make that change. Okay, next story. Hahu Gavra, de Zavin Acham, right? Zavin Arba Decham. Here was a guy. He bought a boat full of wine. So now he had a huge amount of wine. He had nothing to do with it. Lo eshkach dukta lo tuve. So he had nowhere to put it down. Amar lahi itita. He said to this woman, Eat lach dukte lo ugari. Do you have a place you can rent me? Amar lo. She said, no, I don't. Azel kacha. Now he knew she had a place to put it. So what did he do? He betrothed her. This is like people for citizenship might marry someone. So he married her because he wanted to put his bottles of wine somewhere. So she magically found some space, and oh yeah, sure, you could put your wine here. Azal lebete, he goes back home. Katav lagita, he writes her a get because he got what he wanted. Shadola, and he sends it to her. Azla ihi agrish kola mineuve. So she ve'afikte ve'otve b'shvila. What does she do? She hires workers to basically take all the wine and stick it on the street. She said, you're divorcing me? No problem. I'm getting rid of all your wine. Amar Rav Huna B'Reid Rav Yoshua. So he goes to the rabbi and he says, what? She was storing my wine. So Rav Huna B'Reid Rav Yoshua says, good line to this guy. Kasher, right? Scum you are. Kasher asa ken yaselo, just like you did. That's what will be done to you. You tricked her. She tricked you back. And, you tried to do parak mulo yashub barosho. You get what you had coming to you. Lo mebaya chatzir de lo kaim agra. Now, we don't even mean, like, she obviously wasn't planning on renting out space, because when he came to her the first time, she would have rented it to him had she had space to rent. She had space, just it wasn't used for renting. Obviously, then, she has no obligation. But ela afilu chatzir de kaim agra, even if she rented it out to other people, she could still say to him, that's true, I rent it out, but I don't have to rent it out to you. Why? You're like a lion that ambushed me. You totally tricked me. I'm not renting anything out to you. So even if it was a space that she normally did rent out, we can't force her to rent to him. He has no right. He has no ability to force her to rent the space to him after he duped her. This is also interesting. It basically says, a landlord or whatever always has the rights to choose who's going to live in their property. This isn't even who's going to live there. This is just who can put their stuff there, but she can choose. So this guy got what he had coming to him, and we'll move on. I just want you to notice something literarily. It starts off with the arba, which is the boat that's bringing the wine. It ends with this lion arva, which is ambushing, but it's the same word. It's just a literary closure to the story. Rashban Gomel, Shal Naftomim v'Shal Tzabayim Shalosh Shanim, and the Braita says, Tana mipnei she'kefan meguba, because people buy on credit in those stores and don't pay back for a really long time. So to summarize that Mishnah before we move on to the last Mishnah for today, we have, when can you kick someone out of a rental? Can you up the price in the middle? Again, middle doesn't really mean middle of the contract, but middle of the season, when you had a stam contract, not for any particular amount of time, which we assume means 30 days. So when the 30 days are up, if the prices went up in the meantime, you can raise the price. If the prices didn't go up, then you can't raise the prices. That's unfair, abuse of the tenant. Okay, and then we had that, the whole announcing, you have to warn people either 30 days before the season, before the winter season starts, or 30 days in the summer season, or a year if you live in a big city, and if you're a store owner, a year or 3 years, depending on which kind of store you have. New Mishnah. Hamaskir bayit lechavero. This is classic. If you rent a house, who's responsible for what? Hamaskir chayav b'delet. So the maskir has to make sure there's a door, b'neger, the bolt, man'ul, the lock, u'b'chol davar shemaseh uman. Here's a good rule. Anything that you need a specialist to do, that the landlord has to do. V'kol davar she'eno maseh uman, hasocher osehu. Okay, they don't tell you what this is, but anything that's not, that you don't have to hire a worker to come and do, or a special worker, so that the tenant has to. Hazevel shabalabayit, this seems to mean the fertilizer that gets from animals. Okay, there's a courtyard to a house. It's a little bit of an unclear space whether you rented the courtyard, didn't rent the courtyard, but you use the courtyard in any case. What if when people come to the shuk, the animals used to leave their dung in other people's fields and people would use it for fertilizer? So the question is, does that belong to the tenant or to the landlord? So the Mishnah rules the zevel goes to the landlord, not to the tenant. Presumably if the tenant didn't rent the courtyard but does use it for certain purposes, since it's owned by the landlord, then the zevel goes to him. Ashes or things like that are left in the oven. Now, people would use the ovens. They would have the ovens outdoors and friends would come and use them. Whatever's left there that gets left behind, in other words, the assumption is the dung, the owners just left it, and the stuff in the oven, the owners of, whoever cooked in your oven left it, that gets left to the tenant. But the dung gets left to the landlord. Tanu Rabbanan, the Braita reads, that's the Gemara starts off with the Braita, Maskir bayit lechavero, maskir chayav lamid lo dlatot, liftoch lo chalonot, l'chazek lo tikra. They're now listing more things that need maseh uman, and then other things that don't. So put up doors, open the windows, strengthen the roof, the ceilings, lismoch lo korah, to put in the beams, or to fix the beams, Socher chayav la'asot lo sulam. The socher has to make the ladder, though, to get up there. La'asot lo ma'aket, to make the ma'aket to prevent people from falling off the roof. La'asot lo marzev, to do the gutters around the roof, and lahatiach et gago. The roofs were flat, and they would kind of angle them down so the rain would fall off there into the gutters. Okay, now you tell me if that's you need a specialist. I would probably hire someone to do those things, but apparently in those days it was common that people would just do that themselves. Here comes a good question. Who's obligated for mezuzah? Now, you might know this. It's pretty clear from the halacha, and that's what the Gemara is going to say. It says so in a braita. Sorry, I just read, no, mezuzah. Sorry, I read the wrong line. Mezuzah? Why are you asking about a mezuzah? Ha'amar Rav Misharshia, mezuzah chovat hadari. Everybody knows, and Rav Misharshia said it. It's the person who lives there, meaning the tenant. Ela makom mezuzah. We mean is if you have to cut out a space in the wall to fit your mezuzah into the wall, let's say it's a stone wall and you have to carve out the stone, who needs to do that? Amalu Rav Sheshet Tanitua, let's learn it from here. Davar she'em maseh uman, socher oseu. V'hainami lav maseh uman. This isn't really maseh uman, even though chiseling out stone really is, but efsharu beguvta dekanya. You could just, and according to Rashi, hang a reed and put the mezuzah inside the reed and have it very temporary. Some people say, no way, no how, you can't have a mezuzah temporary, but you could put it in a reed and stick it onto the door. Doesn't have to be into the wall. And that's what he means. So there's a good debate here about whether you can have a mezuzah hanging in a haphazard kind of way. According to Rashi, it sounds like you can. So we ended this with what responsibilities, and this is any rental contract is going to list somewhat anyway, things can be open always to interpretation, which always causes friction between landlord and tenant about who's responsible for what. So the Mishnah has a very clear rule. Obviously, what is considered maaseh uman ulo could be a subject of debate. And with that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and a Shavua Tov.